Tonight, there's a small and distant thing passing through the sky above you, and almost nobody would notice it if they were not looking very carefully. It is not bright enough to command attention. It does not arrive with thunder or fire or any of the grand entrances that stories like to invent. It comes quietly, as the most ancient things often do, as a faint traveler moving across a field of stars that have already seen more nights than we could ever count. And yet, for all its softness, it is one of the rarest visitors we can ever hope to witness. It is a wanderer from beyond our own solar system, a body that does not belong to the sun, a fragment that was not born in the cloud of dust and gas that once became our world. For a brief span of nights, it drifts within reach of our telescopes. It bends around our star. It brightens. It loosens a little of its frozen breath into space. Then, just as gently, it will continue onward, back into the dark between stars, carrying its long silence with it. There is something comforting in that, not because it is familiar, but because it is not. It asks nothing of you. It comes too far away to threaten, too quietly to disturb, and too briefly to become ordinary. All you have to do tonight is keep it company for a little while, as one might sit beside a passing train, heard from a distant hillside, or watch a lantern drift along a river until it becomes part of the dark again. If you are already settled beneath a blanket, then let this be the beginning of the night loosening around you. Let the room grow softer at the edges. Let the day lose its grip. Outside, above cities and fields and coastlines and sleeping houses, the sky is doing what it has always done. It is holding motion so vast and patient that human worry looks very small beside it. And among those motions, almost too faint to matter, there is now a traveler from another star moving through our view. It has crossed distances so large that the mind can only glance at them and then look away. It may have spent ages in darkness, longer than the whole span of human memory. It may have passed near no warm light for more time than there have been mountains in their present shapes. And still, here it is, not arriving for us, not performing for us, only passing through while we happen to be alive to notice. That, perhaps, is the most soothing thought of all. We do not own this moment. We have only encountered it. We have not called it here. We cannot keep it. We cannot follow it to the end. We are only fortunate enough to see one brief turning point in an unimaginably long journey. So tonight, there is no need to hold yourself tightly to the details. There is no need to memorize every name, every number, every instrument, every invisible ratio of ice and gas. The sky can carry the details for you. You may listen as loosely as falling leaves. You may let the story wash past in slow layers. If some part of it stays with you, that is enough. If it begins to blur, that is enough too, because this is not a story meant to sharpen the mind. It is a story meant to quiet it, and it begins, as such stories often do, with something almost too small to see, before the object had a name that sounded special, before it belonged to headlines, or observing schedules, or careful scientific papers. It was only a weak point of light caught by a survey telescope doing its ordinary work. Night after night, automated instruments sweep broad fields of sky with a kind of mechanical patience that is easy to underestimate. They do not search for wonder. They search for motion. They search for change. They compare one image to another, then another, looking for the slight shift that might reveal a nearby asteroid, a distant comet, or some small moving body that has quietly entered the neighborhood of the inner planets. Most of what they find belongs here. Most of it loops around the sun in old, lawful paths. Most of it is part of the family, if a cold and scattered family can still be called one. But now and then, amid the endless smallness, Something behaves differently. Imagine a crowded part of the sky, rich with starlight, dense with background points, each one apparently fixed in place. Imagine a telescope taking wide images of that crowded scene. On one frame, there is a speck. On the next, it is not quite where it was. Not much has changed. The shift is delicate to an untrained eye. It would mean nothing to a tired eye. It might be missed to a careless system. It might sink back into the sea of ordinary detections and disappear among countless harmless points. But careful work is made of such tiny differences. That faint speck, moving just enough to betray itself, began to gather attention. Not alarm, not even excitement at first, only attention, because astronomy, for all its sublime subjects, begins with plain habits of looking twice. There is something almost tender in that. The way discovery so often depends not on brilliance, but on patience. One frame compared with another, one measured position placed beside the next, a little motion where stillness was expected. The instrument that first noticed it was part of Sky Survey, designed to notice moving things early. Its task, in the broadest sense, was safety. It watched for bodies that might pass near Earth or through the inner solar system. It had no special reason to hope for an interstellar traveler. It was only doing what it did every clear night, opening its patient mechanical eyes and gathering images from the dark. And yet, because it was patient, it was ready. This is how many beautiful things enter human knowledge, not with a grand revelation, but with routine. A telescope follows its program. Software marks a shift. An observer looks closer. Another observer checks the numbers somewhere. Perhaps over coffee, perhaps under a red light at an observatory desk. Someone notices that the path implied by the first few data points seems slightly off, slightly strange, slightly unwilling to fit the usual shapes. Not enough to make a proclamation, only enough to continue. The object was faint because it was still far and small, and because space is generous with darkness. It sat against a field thick with stars, which made it harder, not easier, to find. To locate motion in such a busy background is like noticing a single grain move on a beach when the whole shore appears still. Yet motion, once seen, has a quiet authority. A star may glitter, a galaxy may blur, but a nearby body shifts. It refuses to stay in place. And so the speck moved from one image to the next, carrying with it the smallest possible promise of a larger story. At that point, nothing about it would have seemed dramatic to anyone outside the work itself. There was no blazing tale yet in the public imagination, no sweeping music, no astonished phrases about cosmic destiny. There was only a moving point and the first suspicion that its motion might belong to something very unusual. This is one of the hidden beauties of astronomy. The universe does not explain itself in emotional terms. It gives clues. It gives faint traces and partial lines and tiny shifts of light. Human beings provide the wonder afterward. The sky itself remains calm. And because the sky remains calm, so can you. You do not need to hurry after that first speck. You may let it remain small for a little longer. You may imagine the telescope still watching, the field of stars unchanged, the silent work of comparing one image to another while most of the world slept. In that quiet labor, the story had already begun, though nobody yet knew how far it would open. There's comfort in beginnings like that, not sudden, but gradual, not loud, but attentive. And as the next measurements came in, as the object's position was tracked with increasing care, the shape of the story slowly changed. It began to separate itself from the familiar traffic of our own system. It began, almost shyly, to reveal that it was not going to stay. This is where the mathematics of the sky becomes strangely elegant. Most small icy bodies we know are bound to the sun. They may swing outward into the cold and return centuries later. They may loop in stretched ellipses so large that generations pass between visits. But however distant they wander, they belong to the gravitational household of our star. The sun has them. It may not hold them closely, but it keeps them. This one was different. When astronomers calculate a path through space, they are doing something both practical and poetic. They take measured positions, times, tiny changes in brightness and location, and from those fragments they infer an orbit, a shape written in motion. Usually that shape closes back on itself. It returns. It has a history with the sun and a future around the sun. But sometimes the path does not close. Sometimes it curves past the star at the center of our system and keeps opening, like a doorway that never shuts. That was the shape this traveler began to trace. At first, the possibility would have been handled with care. Astronomers are trained against romance. They do not name miracles where uncertainty still lives. A few observations can mislead. A short arc of motion can mimic a stranger shape before fuller data settle it. But as more points were added, the open path persisted. The numbers resisted any comfortable belonging. This was not an object that had spent ages circling our sun in secret. It was not merely an overlooked comet finally entering view. It was passing through. There is a particular beauty in that realization. It widens the night without raising its voice. Suddenly, the object is no longer just a small body in our sky. It is evidence of somewhere else. It is matter from another planetary system, another disk of dust and ice and young worlds, circling a different star long ago. It is a fragment of a history that unfolded far from ours, and then, by chance and time and the wandering architecture of the galaxy, arrived here. Not to stay, only to pass, if you imagine the solar system as a home. Then most comets are long absent members of the family returning from cold outer distances. They are familiar strangers. This object was a stranger in the truest sense. It did not know the way back because there was no way back. It did not carry a hidden promise of future returns. It would bend around the sun once, brighten under its light, and continue into the wider dark. The difference matters scientifically, of course, but it also matters emotionally. A returning comet can become part of human memory. It can be anticipated. It can be written into calendars and histories and legends. An interstellar visitor is more fleeting. It appears once within reach of us, and then slips free forever. To witness one is to know, even while looking at it, that this is the only time. Perhaps that is why such objects feel so strange and tender at once. They are distant in origin, brief in encounter, and completely indifferent to our wish to hold them a little longer. As the orbit sharpened, the classification changed. What had seemed at first to be one more small cometary detection in a crowded sky began to acquire a different identity. It was not merely catalogued, it was re-understood. Names in astronomy often follow understanding. We first call things what they seem to be, and only later, if the universe insists, what they truly are. So the traveler moved into a rarer category, one so rare that every confirmed example matters. In the years before this discovery, humanity had already seen two bodies of this kind. One had been deeply puzzling, oddly shaped in impression, difficult to categorize, stirring more speculation than certainty. Another had looked more recognizably cometary, releasing gas and dust in a form that astronomers could study with greater ease. Together, they were enough to suggest that the galaxy sends such wanderers through the spaces between stars more often than we once assumed. though still very rarely within the narrow field of our actual noticing. Now came a third. 3 is not a large number in science. It is barely the beginning of a sample, and yet it is also no longer silence. 3 means that what once felt like an impossible exception begins, ever so slightly, to resemble a population. Not a crowd, not a certainty, but a hint, a suggestion that the Milky Way may be full of old fragments set adrift by their birth systems. Countless bodies wandering in darkness, only a few of which ever happen to pass near enough to a star like ours for anyone to see them. That thought is not frightening. It is soothing in a way that is hard to explain. The galaxy becomes less sealed, less divided into separate private systems. Material moves, histories cross. What formed around one star may someday drift past another. There is a quiet generosity in such a universe, one where pieces travel and carry their origins with them, even when the name of their first home is lost. This new visitor also arrived at a fortunate time. Not fortunate for it, perhaps, but for us. Astronomers are better prepared now than they were for the first known interstellar object. Survey systems are broader. Follow-up observations are quicker. Space telescopes and large observatories can coordinate with a steadiness that would have been harder in earlier decades. The traveler would still be faint, still distant, still fleeting, but it would not vanish before we had properly looked. That made all the difference, because once its orbit told us it came from beyond, the question changed from what is it doing here to what can it tell us before it goes. That is the mood in which the object truly entered the world, not with panic, not even with triumph, but with quiet urgency. A door had opened for a moment. The universe, which usually keeps other planetary systems far outside our reach, had sent us a small physical messenger. Not a message written for us, but a messenger nonetheless. A frozen one, a dim one, a patient one. And if the idea of being visited by a fragment from another star still feels a little too vivid for sleep, you may let the edges soften here. Remember that it is far away. Remember that the story does not demand anything from your body. The traveler is rare, yes, but rarity is not danger. It is only a kind of tenderness, something you are not likely to see often, something worth meeting gently. And now, as it came nearer the sun, it began to change in a way that made it easier for human eyes to love. At first, it had been little more than a moving point. But comets are not static stones. They are frozen archives, mixtures of dust, dark compounds, and volatile ices that can remain inert and unreadable in deep cold, then awaken when warmth finally reaches. Closer this traveler came to our star, the more sunlight began to work on its surface, not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, quietly, like morning touching frost. Ice does not always melt in space the way it does on Earth. In vacuum, some frozen substances pass directly into vapor. They sublimate, leaving the solid state without first becoming liquid. As that happened on and beneath the surface of the traveler, gas escaped. Dust was lifted with it. Around the tiny unseen nucleus, there formed a faint envelope, a soft cloud, an almost atmospheric veil. This was the coma. There is something beautiful about the coma even before one knows its science. It gives the comet a softness that no rocky asteroid possesses. A point becomes a blur. A hard little body becomes something breathing, something exhaling its stored cold into space. Around a nucleus too small and dark to resolve clearly, a pale surrounding glow appears, as if the object were carrying its own little weather made of ancient ice becoming gas under sunlight. Soon after, the tail began to emerge. This is one of those celestial features that people recognize even if they know little else about comets, yet its meaning remains tenderly misunderstood. Comet's tail does not trail behind it in the way dust follows a passing carriage on a dry road. It points away from the sun, shaped by sunlight and the flow of charged particles streaming outward from our star. Gas and dust are pushed, guided, teased into a long extension of light and matter. Comet may move one way, while its tail leans another, always in dialogue with the sun, rather than simply with its own direction of travel. So our traveler, foreign in origin, began to display one of the most familiar gestures in the sky, the growing veil and tail of an active comet. That mattered scientifically because it told observers the object contained volatile ices, materials ready to release into space under solar warmth. But it also mattered emotionally because it transformed the visitor from an orbital curiosity into a visible, living-looking presence. It was no longer only a path through equations. It was a glowing thing, however faint, visibly responding to its encounter with our system. And perhaps that is part of why comets have always felt so dreamlike. They are neither stars nor planets. They are temporary. They wear their change on the outside. Their beauty is a brief expression of instability, of frozen matter becoming vapor and dust under light. They bloom by being slowly undone. There is something deeply soft in that. The traveler from another star was now doing exactly this. Its surface, preserved for ages in cold darkness, was waking. Material that may have remained sealed for billions of years was beginning to escape. A halo of foreign gas and dust was appearing under the sun's attention. A body that began its story around another star was now, for a little while, glowing in ours. Nothing in this process needed to feel hurried. Even the change itself can be imagined gently. Sunlight touches, ice loosens, gas drifts outward, dust catches the light. A tail lengthens grain by grain into the black. The great advantage of a sleep story is that you are allowed to picture all this slowly, without the hard edges of textbook language. You do not need to hold the equations. You only need the image. A faint old traveler growing soft in sunlight. As more telescopes turned toward it, that image became clearer. This was no longer the work of one survey instrument alone. Once the object's unusual path was recognized, observatories around the world began to join in. Larger telescopes, with deeper light-gathering power, could hold it more steadily against the dark. Different instruments could measure its brightness, its coma, the early structure of the tail, and the shifting certainty of its orbit. Each observation added weight. Each clear image moved the traveler a little further from suspicion into trust. There is something restful about coordinated observation when it is done well, not because the data are simple, but because the human effort becomes beautifully orderly. One telescope watches from a mountain, while another prepares in a different hemisphere. Observers share positions. Brightness estimates spectra, images. No one instrument carries the whole story. The picture grows by agreement, by patient layering, by the kind of collaboration that resembles quiet weather systems, passing information from one shore to the next. In that sense, the comet became real gradually, not because it had ever been unreal, of course, but because reality in science often matures through confirmation. A single unusual detection can remain vulnerable to error. Many detections, from many places, under many conditions, begin to settle into solidity. The traveler was seen again and again, measured again and again, not only from Earth, but from above the worst blurring effects of the atmosphere. When space-based instruments joined the effort, the result was not merely confidence. It was intimacy. Astronomers could now watch the shape of the coma more carefully, trace the brightness as the comet approached the sun, and refine the motion that marked it as unbound, to our star. With enough observations, even a very distant body begins to feel almost companionable. You know where to look. You know how it has changed since the previous night. You learn its habits, if not its whole history. And the object's history, of course, was the true lure. Because unlike a local comet, this one had not grown up in the same protoplanetary cradle as Earth and the planets. It had formed elsewhere, in another disk around another star, under another pattern of temperature and chemistry and giant planets and drifting dust. To study it was to hold, however briefly and remotely, a physical remnant of another system's early life. The telescopes could not see all that at once. They saw what they could, the outward signs, the tail, the diffuse veil, the measured brightness, the motion against stars. But piece by piece, those outward signs made room for deeper questions. If it was active, what ices was it releasing? If it had come from another star system, what would its chemistry reveal? Would it look utterly foreign, or quietly familiar, or some mixture of both? These are the moments when astronomy becomes a kind of reading. First you see the object, then you begin to interpret the light it gives. Before we get there, though, it is worth lingering a little longer on the shape of its passage through our sky, because its orbit is one of the clearest things it ever told us. The language of orbital mechanics can sound severe when reduced to terms and diagrams, but the idea itself is gentle enough. Some paths in space are like returns. They are loops, stretched or near circular, but fundamentally loyal to the body at the center. Other paths are visits. They sweep inward, bend, and depart. To imagine this traveler's route, picture a line coming in from the far dark, curving around the sun under the persuasion of gravity, brightening briefly as it comes nearest, and then opening away again into the wider black. That nearest point to the sun matters. Astronomers call it perihelion. But you do not need to hold the word if it feels too crisp. Think of it simply as the moment of closest warmth, the point in the journey where sunlight does its strongest work on the comet's surface, where hidden volatiles wake more fully, where the coma and tail may become richest, and where observers have their best chance to catch the traveler at its most expressive. For a returning comet, such a moment is part of a repeating cycle, perhaps one too long for any single lifetime to witness twice. For an interstellar traveler, it is the one luminous bend we are ever likely to see. Before that point, it is on the way in. After it, it is fading away. There is no second chance arranged centuries in the future. There is only this passing brightness, and then departure. The speed of such an object is also part of its character. Bound comets can slow and return under the long authority of the sun. An unbound visitor enters with the momentum of a body that belongs to no orbit here. Gravity can redirect it, but not adopt it. It moves fast enough that astronomers must keep up, refining its predicted position, updating where it will appear night by night, making sure instruments are ready when the brief windows come. Yet speed, in this story, is not something to make dramatic. It is simply another sign that the traveler is not ours, another clue that it has arrived from elsewhere and will not be staying. There is a serenity in that once you stop asking speed to sound dangerous. In the emptiness of space, fast motion is often just the natural expression of long-distance wandering. And here's the part that matters for sleep, for the body listening in the dark. None of this implied threat. The object, though rare and scientifically precious, was passing at a safe distance. It would not come sweeping close to Earth in any cinematic sense. It would remain a remote event, near enough for telescopes to study, far enough that human curiosity could unfold without any shadow of fear. It is worth saying plainly because the imagination likes to sharpen what is unusual. This was not a menace entering the inner solar system. It was a gift of distance, a chance to study a foreign comet without any danger attached to the privilege. There is relief in that, a great deal of relief. The cosmos can sometimes feel calmer when its wonders keep respectful space from us. We can admire them better that way. We can rest beside them rather than brace against them. This traveler would come close enough to reveal itself, far enough to remain only a beauty in the instruments and the night. So if the mind begins to lean into anxious pictures, simply because the story contains the word interstellar, let that go now. Let the body hear the truth of the event instead. This is a peaceful encounter, a silent passing, a thing of distance, light, and patient observation. And because it is peaceful, we can return to the comet's visible grace. As the coma brightened and the tail stretched more clearly outward, the traveler offered astronomers something more than orbit. It offered texture. The coma, that diffuse cloud around the nucleus, was not decoration. It was evidence. It was material newly released, carrying information about the ices and dust within. The tail, too, was not just a beautiful line. It was the visible consequence of sunlight and solar wind acting on foreign matter that had crossed from another planetary system into ours. If you imagine the coma as a breath, then spectroscopy is the act of sensing what that breath contains. This is where some of the most delicate and fascinating work began. Light from the comet, especially from the cloud of gas surrounding it, could be spread into its component wavelengths. In that spread, molecules reveal themselves by the specific ways they absorb or emit light. The process is technical in practice, but the underlying idea is almost tender. Different substances leave different signatures in light, and by reading those signatures, astronomers can infer composition from afar. It is like listening to a voice in the dark and learning, from the quality of its sound, something about the room it came from. Space telescopes with strong infrared sensitivity are especially good at this kind of reading. Visible light gives beauty. Infrared often gives chemistry. It can detect the thermal and spectral hints of molecules that shape a comet's behavior and reveal something about the temperatures and conditions of its birthplace. In the case of an interstellar comet, that means chemistry becomes a message from another system's past. Not a message written intentionally, but a record, nevertheless. And so the traveler's glow was unfolded, line by line, into clues. Water-related signatures were expected, and indeed, the familiar presence of water vapor was part of the story. But there were other components that drew particular attention. Carbon dioxide emerged strongly. Carbon monoxide, too, mattered for what it suggested. These are not exotic molecules in the absolute sense. They are known ingredients of comets and planetary environments. But the relative abundance of such materials and the balance among them can hint at where and how a comet formed. Comet is not just a dirty snowball, as old casual descriptions used to say. It is a preserved sample of conditions. Different ices freeze and survive under different temperatures. Different regions of a young planetary system favor different mixtures. If a comet forms far from its star, in deep or cold, it may preserve very volatile compounds that would not survive as easily closer in. If its host system had a different chemical balance than our own early solar nebula, that difference may remain locked in the comet for billions of years. So when this traveler's spectrum suggested an especially notable presence of carbon-bearing ices, astronomers paid attention. Carbon dioxide is interesting partly because it can drive cometary activity even at distances where water ice is less dominant. It can sublimate and feed the coma before a comet has drawn very close to the sun. If abundant, it tells a story not only about current behavior, but about the environment in which the comet once formed. Carbon monoxide, more volatile still, carries its own implications. To preserve and later release it in measurable quantity suggests formation or long-term storage in very cold conditions indeed. You do not have to hold the exact chemistry tonight. What matters is the feeling of what chemistry can mean. The traveler was not merely glowing, it was disclosing. Every molecule identified in its escaping gases was a small testimony about a distant birth environment, now otherwise inaccessible to us. This is one of the quiet miracles of science, and perhaps one of the most soothing. We cannot travel to the system that made this comet. We may never identify its exact home star. We cannot scoop a sample into our hands, but light, treated with enough patience and intelligence, still lets us know something real. Across impossible distances, matter remains legible, and the more legible the traveler became, the more it seemed to come from a place not exactly like our own. That does not mean utterly alien in some sensational sense. The universe repeats certain patterns. Ice is still ice. Dust is still dust. Gravity still sculpts systems with patient force. But within those broad similarities, there is room for meaningful difference. The ratios of gases can shift. The abundance of carbon-bearing compounds can suggest colder or differently structured birthplace. The balance between water, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide can hint that the recipe for building comets in one system is not identical to the recipe in another. This is why interstellar objects matter so deeply. They widen the known range of planetary history. It is easy to imagine the solar system as normal simply because it is ours. But ours is only one outcome among many. Each foreign comet that passes through gives us one more chance to compare, one more fragment, one more preserved shard of another beginning. If you like, you may imagine the chemistry not as dry information, but as climate memory held in ice, a cold remembered for billions of years, a birthplace remembered in ratios invisible to the eye, an ancient environment long gone from its original star, still whispering through the vapor, now released under sunlight near ours. The body listening in bed need not parse every whisper. It can be enough simply to know that the traveler carried a different memory of world-making. Around this point in the story, the scale begins to widen again. Chemistry points back toward birthplace, and birthplace points beyond a single comet to the architecture of the galaxy itself. Where, after all, did such an object spend its life before it brushed past our sun? What region of the Milky Way might have shaped it? How old might it be? The Milky Way is not one simple slab of stars. It has neighborhoods, if we may use a gentle human word, for something so vast. There is the bright thin disk, where much of the familiar star formation occurs, rich with gas, dust, and younger stellar populations. There are older populations too, spread more thickly above and below the main plane, moving with different patterns and carrying older histories. There is the halo, sparse and ancient, and streams of stars left from past encounters and mergers. Our galaxy is layered not only in space, but in time. When astronomers try to infer the larger origin of an interstellar object, they are working with motion, direction, speed, and probability rather than certainty. The exact home system is usually unrecoverable over immense stretches of time. Stars move, gravitational nudges accumulate, passing encounters alter trajectories. The galaxy is dynamic, and a small body drifting between stars for billions of years will not carry a simple return address. Still, broad clues may remain. The way the traveler entered the solar system, the speed with which it passed, the larger galactic context of its motion. All these can suggest that it may have come not from a youthful, crowded region like our own immediate stellar neighborhood, but from an older population of stars, perhaps from a thicker, older component of the Milky Way, where ancient systems have spent long ages, drifting on their own more elevated orbits above and below the bright galactic plane. That is so. The implications are profound in a very quiet way. It would mean this comet is not only foreign to the sun, it may be old beyond ordinary intuition, older perhaps than our own solar system, older than Earth, older than the warm continuity of life here, a preserved small body from a system that may have formed in an earlier chapter of the galaxy's history, then been scattered loose and left to wander. Try to feel that slowly without forcing the mind to grip it too hard. There are objects in space, older than the sun, of course. That is not the astonishing part. But to have one pass close enough to study, one carrying tangible chemistry from another ancient system, is something more intimate. It turns age from an abstract cosmic fact into a local encounter. This little traveler may have condensed in the cold outskirts of a distant young system before our own star had even ignited. It may have orbited its first sun only briefly before a giant planet or gravitational instability flung it outward for good. Such violence at the beginning is not unusual in forming planetary systems. Giant planets scatter small bodies. Comets are thrown into wider reservoirs or out of their systems entirely. The early architecture of worlds is often untidy. In that sense, exile is part of the making. So perhaps this object began as one among countless icy fragments in the outer region of a young disk around an ancient star. Perhaps a large planet, newly formed and powerful, altered its path. One encounter, or a series of them, was enough to unbind it forever. The object left. Its home system kept changing without it. Worlds settled into orbits, or did not. Stars aged, dust cleared. Perhaps life began somewhere in that lost system, perhaps not. The comet was already gone. Then came the long middle. This may be the most soothing part of all, the portion of the story that belongs most naturally to sleep. Once ejected from its original system, the traveler would have entered the great interstellar dark, where the spaces between stars are so vast and so empty that time itself seems to stretch and cool. Out there, far from any warm sun, change is slow. Ice remains locked. Surfaces are preserved. The body drifts not with purpose, but with persistence. No hurry, no destination in the human sense. Just motion inherited from a very old event and carried onward through silence. Billions of years may have passed like that. Our language is poor at such scales. We say billions as if the word itself could bear the weight. But on those timescales, continents shift. Stars are born and die. Galaxies interact, and entire climates rise and vanish. For a small icy body to endure through such spans is its own kind of testimony. It has survived without melting into nothing, without being shattered beyond recognition, without falling fully under the sway of another star, until now. It has kept its cold. It has kept its material memory. It has kept going. You can imagine it alone. Though not lonely, because loneliness is a human feeling, and space is larger than that. Imagine it crossing regions sparse with light. Imagine stars changing slowly in the distance. Imagine clouds of diffuse gas too thin to matter much. Imagine the occasional far-off gravitational persuasion of passing stellar systems, each one adjusting the path by a whisper. Not enough to warm it, not enough to claim it, only enough over ages to steer it very gradually through the galaxy's long tides. At some point, by chance and motion and the unending rearrangement of stars, its path intersected ours. Not Earth, exactly. Not us specifically. The solar system was simply there, moving through the Milky Way along with everything else. And the traveler happened to cross near enough to be bent by the sun and brightened for observation. We like to imagine events as centered on human witness, but the truth is often softer. We were present. That is all. The encounter did not happen for us. It happened with us nearby. There is humility in that, and humility is restful. The universe is immense enough to make human life feel both small and precious. Small, because our stories do not govern its movements. Precious, because within our brief lives we can still notice things like this. We can still recognize that a dim old body from another star has entered our instruments, released its ancient ices to our measurements, and passed on while a few generations of observers happened to be alive. As the traveler continued toward, and then beyond its nearest encounter with the sun, the data would keep arriving for a while. Night after night, it would be tracked a little farther along its path. The coma might change, the tail might lengthen, then fade. The chemistry would be studied, refined, compared. Papers would be written, models improved, discussions softened into clearer understanding. In that sense, the object's visit would leave a long afterlife in human knowledge, even after its visible presence diminished. But the visible event itself would not last. This is perhaps another reason the story belongs so naturally to the hours before sleep. It is about a brief brightening in the middle of a long darkness, a passing phase, a temporary unveiling. The traveler comes close enough to glow, close enough to be read, and then resumes the deeper anonymity from which it emerged. So many things in life are like that, though on smaller scales. Moments that become possible only because paths cross briefly. Glimpses, encounters, periods of illumination followed by release. We do not have to make those moments permanent to love them. And now, as we near the end of this quiet journey together, we can let the story return from the scale of galaxies to something smaller and softer again. The traveler is still out there somewhere above the sleeping world, and though our minds have followed it through discovery, orbit, chemistry, age, and deep interstellar drift, your body has remained here all along. In the room, in the dark, in the ordinary safety of night, that matters, even when it has carried you very far. So let the details begin to loosen now. You do not need to arrange them. You do not need to remember which molecule suggested which cold, or which telescope first deepened the image, or which region of the galaxy may have given birth to the traveler. Let all that thin out like breath on a winter window. What remains is simpler. A very old object came from another star. It was seen first as a tiny moving point in a crowded sky. Its path showed that it did not belong to the sun. Sunlight woke a faint cloud and tail around it. Its escaping gases revealed a chemistry shaped somewhere else. Its motion hinted at an ancient history, perhaps older than our own star. Pass safely by. It will go on. That is enough. Perhaps the most beautiful part is that we have not seen its beginning, and we will not see its end. We have not stood in the system where it formed. We did not witness the giant planet or gravitational accident that cast it into interstellar night. We did not accompany it through its billion-year solitude. We will not follow it all the way onward, after it leaves the sun behind. We have seen only one gentle bend in the middle of its journey, and yet, even that is a great deal. A single bend in an ancient path, a single release of old ice into a new star's light, a single crossing between one system and another. Sometimes a fragment is enough to widen the whole imagination. Sometimes one faint visitor is enough to remind us that the galaxy is not a set of sealed rooms, but a place where matter wanders, where histories drift, where lost pieces still travel. If you are growing sleepy now, then let the comet become simpler still, no longer an object of classification or analysis, but a small pale presence moving quietly through dark space, a drifting point with a soft veil around it, a little tail made of dust and light, a bit of ancient cold turning transparent near a foreign sun. And if even that feels like too much image to hold, then let it become only motion, something coming in from far away, something curving gently, something continuing on. You may rest inside that rhythm, coming in, curving, continuing on. The mind does not need more than that. The body certainly does not. It can lie still and let the sky keep moving without it. Outside, the night goes on with its usual patience. Roofs cool, trees stand in place, distant roads quiet down. Across oceans, other people sleep, wake, keep watch, or never know that above them a traveler from another star is slipping past in measured silence. The comet does not mind whether it is seen. The stars do not mind either. That indifference is not cold. It is freedom. It means the universe does not require your performance tonight. It does not need you alert. It does not need you to finish every thought. You are allowed to drift before the story does. Maybe, somewhere in the blur between waking and sleep, you can imagine the object as it was long ago, newly cast out from its home system, beginning a journey it could not understand because understanding is for beings like us, not for ice and dust. Maybe you can imagine it farther along, suspended in the deep dark where no dawn arrived for ages. Maybe you can imagine the sun at last appearing as just another star ahead, growing only gradually into significance. Perhaps it felt nothing, and perhaps that is part of the comfort. Not every journey must be felt to be real. Not every passage requires witness. Then the sun warms it, the coma forms, the tail unfurls, telescopes turn, human minds lean close. For one brief season, this forgotten fragment becomes legible. It gives up a little of its chemistry, a little of its brightness, a little of its history, not because it chooses to, but because matter under light always speaks, if we know how to listen. And now, it is already beginning to go. That is all right. The story does not need a hard ending. It would be untrue if it had one. The comet does not conclude. It recedes. It fades. It thins into distance until only data remain. And then even data become memory. And memory becomes part of the larger human habit of looking up and finding, now and then, that the sky has offered us something from very far away. You do not need to follow it farther than this. Let the traveler continue without you. Let the galaxies keep their layered ages. Let the chemistry settle back into cold. Let the tail become a faint line, then a thought, then less than a thought. Return, if you like, to the room around you, to the blanket resting across your body, to the pillow beneath your head, to the easy fact of breathing. Air in, air out, warmth held close. No danger anywhere in this story. Only distance, only light, only a brief meeting between one old wanderer and one small sleeping world. The mind can set the rest down now, somewhere above. The traveler keeps moving, not quickly in the way dreams imagine speed, but steadily. As all long journeys are steady, it goes on into a darkness it already knows well. The sun grows smaller behind it. The coma will fade. The tail will disperse. The bright moment near our star will become just one more passing phase, along an older, longer road of silence. And here, the night remains soft. You remain safe. Nothing else is required. If a final image wants to stay with you, let it be this. A tiny ancient body, older perhaps than the sun itself, drifting through the black with a little borrowed glow around it. Not lost, Not found, simply passing. The kind of passing that asks for no answer, the kind that lets the world grow quieter rather than louder, the kind that fits gently beside sleep. And if that image begins to fade too, let it fade. The traveler goes on. The sky keeps its silence. The room stays warm. Your thoughts can loosen one by one. And somewhere, far beyond the edges of waking attention, a small comet from another star continues its long, unhurried journey through the dark.